Hey Gatsby fans, it's Mr. Bradley again with another chapter summary for you. Chapter 7, absolutely brutal. Myrtle dies, Gatsby's relationship with Daisy is over, he just doesn't know it yet. So, Chapter 8, I hate to say it, probably my least favorite chapter in the book. Doesn't get much better. So, Chapter 8, this is the last line of the chapter right here, and the Holocaust was complete, Fitzgerald 173. Let's see exactly what happens here, shall we? So, Nick goes home. He's laying in bed, tossing and turning. He hears the foghorn on the sound. And then about dawn, he hears a taxi head up Gatsby's driveway. So, since he's already asleep, or since he's already awake, he just gets up and goes over to Gatsby's house. Gatsby ends up waiting outside Daisy's house until about 4 o'clock. She comes to the window briefly, then turns off the light and goes to sleep. So, Gatsby and Nick end up wandering through the house by themselves this night, exploring every room, some that hadn't been opened in days. And this is where Nick finds out everything about who Gatsby really is. James Gatz, young farm boy from North Dakota, World War I vet, looking to find his place in the world and a way to win Daisy back. And Nick says, you need to go away for a while. He says, no, I can't go away now. He wouldn't even consider it. He won't leave Daisy till he knows what he's going to do. So he hears the story about Gatsby and Daisy. Gatsby was a nobody who showed up at this rich girl's house and managed to convince her that he was somebody who was important, that he had value, and he had given Daisy this sense of security, this idea that he was fully able to take care of her. Instead, he gets sent to war. And Gatsby had fallen in love with her. And they just sat there and they spent so much time together over the course of 2 months. He did well in the war, but Daisy was feeling pressure back home. Daisy didn't wait for Daisy didn't wait for Gatsby. Page 161. He was worried now. There was a quality of nervous despair in Daisy's letters. She didn't see why he couldn't come. He was feeling the pressure of the world outside. She was feeling the pressure of the world outside, and she wanted to see him and feel his presence beside her and be reassured that she was doing the right thing after all. For Daisy was young, and her artificial world was redolent of orchids and pleasant, cheerful snobbery, and orchestras which set the rhythm of the year, summing up the sadness and suggestiveness of life in new tunes. All night the saxophones wailed the hopeless comment of the Beale Street blues, while 100 pairs of golden and silver slippers shuffled the shining dust. At the gray tea hour there were always rooms that throbbed incessantly with this low, sweet fever, while fresh faces drifted here and there like rose petals blown by the sad horns around the floor. Through this twilight universe Daisy began to move, again with the season. She was again keeping half a dozen dates a day with half a dozen young men and drowsing asleep at dawn with the beads and chiffon of an evening dress tangled among drying orchids on the floor beside her bed. And all the time something within her was crying out for a decision. She wanted her life shaped now, immediately. And the decision must be made by some force of love, of money, and of unquestionable practicality that was close at hand. That force took shape in the middle of spring with the arrival of Tom Buchanan. There was a wholesome bulkiness about his person and his position, and Daisy was flattered. Doubtless there was a certain struggle and a certain relief. The letter reached Gatsby while he was still at Oxford. She didn't wait because she was incapable of waiting. She was young, she was immature, and she needed someone else to make the decision for her. So when Tom Buchanan showed up, his strength of presence made the decision that she didn't have to wait for Gatsby anymore. Gatsby still has fooled himself into thinking that maybe, just maybe, that she would change her mind. The gardener comes out and says, "Hey, I'm going to drain the pool today, Mr. Gatsby." Gatsby says, "No, don't." He looks at Nick and says, "I haven't used that pool all summer." Nick looked at his watch and said, I've got to go to work. I've got 12 minutes to catch my train." Says, "I'll call you up. I'll call you about noon." He turns around and he looks at Gatsby. He says, "They're a rotten crowd. You're worth the whole damn bunch put together." So Nick goes to work, and Gatsby decides to take a swim. Jordan calls him at work, and he kind of breaks up with her. It's like they're talking about things, and they're trying to figure out exactly how they're going to make things work. Page 166. We talked like that for a while, and then abruptly we weren't talking anymore. I don't know which of us hung up with a sharp click, but I know I didn't care. I couldn't have talked to her across a tea table that day if I never talked to her again in this world. So while Nick's trying to get some work done and trying to catch the train, George Wilson's trying to deal with the death of his wife. Michaelis, who happened to own the diner across the street, stays with George for a while. Tries to make him feel better, asks him questions like, "How long have you been married? Did you ever have any kids? Do you have a church you can go to sometimes? Maybe if you haven't been for a long time, somebody who can come over and help you feel better." And Michaelis is like, "Listen, I got to go open my restaurant." Says, "Are you going to be okay for a while?" He says, George says, "Go open that desk drawer over there." "Well, which drawer?" He says. "No, that drawer, that one." He opens up the drawer nearest his hand. There was a small, expensive dog leash made of leather and braided silver, apparently new. George says, "I found it yesterday afternoon. She tried to tell me about it, but I knew something was funny." Michaelis thought, well, okay, it's a dog leash. But Wilson says, "And then he killed her." "Well, who did?" "Well, I have a way of finding out." "Oh, he murdered her. It was an accident, George." He says, "I know it was the man in that car. She ran out to speak to him, and he wouldn't stop." Michaelis doesn't believe it. He goes to open up his restaurant, leaves some other people with Wilson. By the time Michaelis wakes up 4 hours later, Wilson was gone. So by 10 o'clock in the morning, Wilson is gone. Wilson goes about trying to track down the person who he thinks killed his wife. So the only connection he has to this person is the person that was driving the yellow car earlier in the day, Tom Buchanan. So Wilson meets up with Tom Buchanan and finds out where Gatsby lives. And he breaks into Gatsby's house while Gatsby's in the pool. And he shoots and kills Gatsby. And then shoots and kills himself. Nick says the chauffeur, he was one of Wolfsheim's proteges, heard the shots. Afterward, he could only say he hadn't thought anything much about them. "I drove from the station directly to Gatsby's house, and my rushing anxiously up the front steps was the first thing that alarmed anyone. But they knew then, I firmly believe. With scarcely a word said, 4 of us, the chauffeur, butler, gardener, and I, hurried down to the pool. There was a faint, barely perceptible movement of the water as the fresh flow from one end urged its way up toward the drain at the other. With little ripples that were hardly the shadows of waves, the laden mattress moved irregularly down the pool. A small gust of wind that scarcely corrugated the surface was enough to disturb its accidental course with its accidental burden. The touch of a cluster of leaves revolved it slowly, tracing, like the leg of a compass, a thin red circle in the water. It was after we started with Gatsby toward the house that the gardener saw Wilson's body a little way off in the grass, and the Holocaust was complete. So ends Chapter 8. We'll wrap up the book in our next video.